Collapse of soil as the basic resource has led to decline of societies for the last 12,000 years. So, our great challenge is to learn from the lessons of the past and make sure that we don't follow in their footsteps. And I'm sure that many of the current practices in terms of what we do to our soils are not sustainable in the long term. There's just no question.
I think a revitalization where we understand microorganisms and we see that soil is a living, breathing being that can have as many living beings in a handful of good topsoil as there are people on the planet, and that we feed that system and we support it, the mycological cycle, the bacteriological components, the little macroinvertebrates and the annelids, the worms, and that we feed, they're the workhorses of the system, and that plants work off of that, and we're the top carnivores in the system. And if we don't take care of the base of the food chain, the pyramid at the bottom, it's going to be a very hungry future.
Every time you put a pesticide on, you're killing biology in the soil. Every time you put an inorganic fertilizer on, you're killing something in the soil. And that's removing your ability to hold on to those nutrients. You kill that life, you destroy the organic matter, there's nothing to hold those fertilizers that you put on. The only thing your plant's getting is what washes down and actually contacts the root, and then some of that will be taken up. But if that pulse is more than the plant can take up at this instant, it's going to wash right on by. Once it's out of the root zone, your plant's not going to get it, it's going to go for your drink of water.
If we take care of it, we get the soil healthy, the soil will protect us. But in many of these areas, the soil is unhealthy by the way we're managing the system, and therefore the groundwater's jeopardized, and et cetera, et cetera. It goes, yeah.
Ecological illiteracy is the gravest epidemic we face on the planet today. We live in the most ecologically illiterate civilization that has ever existed.
When we got really adept at making enough food for ourselves so that we didn't have to worry about boom and bust anymore quite so much. Really, when you get down to it, not at all. I think we just swung the pendulum all the way out there thinking, oh my God, we can make food anywhere, as much as we want. We can make it this easy. We can raise just gazillions of tons of corn and soybeans. Now there we are out there on that pendulum looking back down at the middle and saying, uh-oh, but look what we left behind. Look what we sort of ignored for a while and even kind of unlearned is our connection to a healthy nature and a healthy environment.
It's a complete lack of understanding of the whole cycle. And it's, if the whole cycle, each step along the way has to occur to get it back into the form where you can start the cycle again and keep going and sustain things. Human beings seem to like to take a couple steps out of that cycle and let everything accumulate right here until it gets to be an overwhelming problem and pushes the system out of whack. And we're going to go off in some whole other different cycling process, which may or may not include human beings as part of the process.
Restoration is the movement for the future. And I think to get to restoration, we have to step back and do restoration. And we have to restory our connection with place and people and tell a new story. What is the story you believe in? What is the creation myth that holds power for you? Is the planet a community or a commodity? What's that story? And can you restory your connection to place and implement it pragmatically to get to restoration? And that's an interesting conundrum for the future.
The question is now, how quick can we turn around our practices and preserve the soil and the soil biota that we have left so we have a sustainable system for the long term? lot of my research has been the effects of disturbance on these beneficial soil organisms. How does man's activities influence their distribution, and how does their distribution influence the performance of plants? So we've sort of looked at disturbance, which is everywhere. I mean, it's very difficult now to go to a place that hasn't been disturbed in some way, and some of that's natural, but man's effects have been pretty profound.
Disturbance, as far as I can tell, is really one of the hallmarks or the keystones of ecological land management. The question becomes, are you a regenerative disturber or a degenerative disturber?
And between the compaction and the organic matter removal and then all the other disturbance effects and all the chemistries that we've unleashed on the soils.
When we go into a place that's got noxious weeds growing on it, in many cases because the soil is in such horrible shape, that's the only thing that can possibly survive there. And what we do is treat it with chemicals, which of course makes the soil even more simplified, which makes it so really now noxious weeds are the only thing that's going to grow there.
The question becomes then, what is the most beneficial way to replace what you've utilized? And what's most sustainable in terms of the other organisms that live in and around that environment.
We're dumping so much fertilizer on, and it really isn't increasing yields.
You can get a big bang in productivity with chemical fertilizers, but then you have this domino effect.
As we've tilled more, and soil's been in agriculture longer, the more fertilizer you have to put on. So your fertilizer costs are going like this, but yields are going like that.
When the alternative is to bring in goats or some kind of critter and restart all these old relationships, get this all going again.
Getting the biology back into the soil, stop killing it, get it back in.